What if I told you that the most powerful goddesses in European mythology were deliberately erased from history, that their worship wasn't merely forgotten, but systematically destroyed? Welcome back as Blasphemous. I am Krista, and today we begin our exploration of Slavic mythology, a realm of ancient deities whose power was so threatening that entire civilizations worked to obliterate their memory. Our journey starts with Morana, the goddess who controlled both death and resurrection long before Christianity claimed this power exclusively. Morana, also known as Marzana or Morana across different Slavic regions, stands as one of the oldest and most powerful deities in the Slavic pantheon. Her name derives from the Proto-Indo-European root famer, meaning to die, the same root that gives us words like mortal and murder. This etymology reveals her primary domain, death itself. Archaeological evidence suggests her worship predates written records, with ritual sites dating back to at least the 8th century BCE. These sites, typically located near bodies of water, contain distinctive artifacts, effigies made of straw and cloth, ritual implements for sacrifice, and most tellingly, human and animal remains arranged in patterns consistent with ceremonial practices rather than standard burial. What makes Morana particularly fascinating is her triple nature as goddess of winter, death, and paradoxically, rebirth. Unlike the sanitized deities of popular culture, Morana represented the harsh reality of winter in Slavic lands, a time when death walked freely among isolated villages, when food grew scarce, and when survival itself became the primary ritual. The winter aspect of Morana wasn't merely symbolic. In regions where temperatures regularly plunged below freezing for months, winter was a literal death sentence for the vulnerable. Morana embodied this killing cold, not as a malevolent force, but as a necessary aspect of the natural cycle. The Slavic worldview didn't categorize deities as simply good or evil, but understood them as essential forces maintaining cosmic balance. Her connection to death extended beyond winter's physical threats. Morana governed the transition between life and death, serving as psychopomp, a guide for souls. Ancient Slavic burial practices included offerings specifically for Morana, intended to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. These offerings typically included items representing transformation, seeds, eggs, and figurines, depicting both skeletal and pregnant female forms, symbolizing death's connection to new life. If you are fascinated by these forgotten deities, you will love our book The Venom of the White Snake, which explores similar themes of powerful feminine forces throughout mythology. Or for those who want to engage with these concepts through gameplay, our 2D6 Belief Engine role-playing system lets you create characters who draw power from forgotten gods. Links to both are in the description. Now, let's continue our journey into Morana's dark domain. The most famous ritual associated with Morana was the drowning of her effigy at winter's end, a practice that survived Christianization and continues in parts of Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and other Slavic regions today. This ritual follows a specific pattern that has remained remarkably consistent across centuries and geographical boundaries. First, a community would create an effigy representing the goddess. Traditional construction used a cross-shaped wooden frame dressed in white cloth or female clothing, adorned with ribbons, beads, and sometimes eggs or other fertility symbols. This effigy, simultaneously representing death and the potential for new life, would be carried through the village in a solemn procession. Participants would sing specific songs that have survived in folk traditions. One Polish variant translates roughly as, "Death floats on the water, new life blooms in the field. Winter departs with sorrow, spring arrives with joy." The procession would culminate at a body of water, typically a river, lake, or even a well in regions without natural water sources. There, the effigy would be set aflame and thrown into the water, symbolizing both the destruction of winter's power and the transformation of death into life through water's purifying properties. What modern celebrations overlook is the darker aspect of these rituals. Archaeological evidence suggests that in pre-Christian times, these ceremonies included blood sacrifice. Animal bones showing ritual slaughter marks have been found at numerous Morana sites, particularly those dating from the 5th to 9th centuries CE. More controversially, Some archaeological evidence suggests human sacrifice in certain regions during times of extreme winter hardship. Though this remains debated among scholars, household worship was equally important. Unlike the Norse gods, who were primarily honored in public ceremonies, Slavic deities like Morana were invited into the home. Small shrines featuring female figurines with distinctive skull-like faces have been found in excavations of Slavic dwellings. These household shrines typically included vessels for offerings of food, particularly grains and eggs symbolizing rebirth. Women played a central role in Morana's worship. Female priestesses, or wise women, led many of her rituals, particularly those associated with death and childbirth, two domains seen as intimately connected in Slavic cosmology. This female-centered worship would later make Morana particularly threatening to patriarchal religious structures. The systematic erasure of Morana from history began with Christianization of Slavic lands, a process that occurred later than in Western Europe, primarily between the 9th and 12th centuries. Christian authorities recognized the power of Morana's worship and employed specific strategies to suppress it. First was demonization, transforming Morana from a complex deity of natural cycles into a purely evil figure. Her association with death was emphasized while her connection to rebirth was deliberately obscured. Early Christian texts from the region describe her as death's handmaiden and winter's demon, stripping away her role in ensuring new life. Second was appropriation. Many of Morana's sacred sites were converted to Christian usage, with churches built directly over ritual grounds. Her celebration dates were repurposed as Christian feast days, particularly connecting to the Virgin Mary. The timing of Easter celebrations, with their emphasis on death and resurrection, conveniently aligned with traditional Morana festivals, marking winter's end. Most effective was fragmentation, breaking Morana's worship into disconnected folk practices, stripped of religious significance. The drowning of her effigy was reframed as merely saying goodbye to winter, rather than a profound religious ritual honoring a powerful goddess. Songs and stories about her were preserved only as children's rhymes or superstitions, their deeper meaning lost. This pattern of erasure wasn't unique to Morana, but was particularly thorough in her case, because of what she represented: female power over death and rebirth. As historian Maria Gimbutas noted in her controversial but influential work, the goddesses who controlled both the giving of life and its taking were systematically transformed into demons, or reduced to folklore precisely because their power threatened emerging patriarchal structures. Yet despite these efforts, Morana proved remarkably resilient. Her presence survived in folklore, in seasonal traditions, and in the collective memory of Slavic peoples. When 19th-century folklorists began collecting Slavic myths and legends, they found Morana's influence still evident across Eastern Europe, though fragmented and disguised. If you're intrigued by these deliberately erased deities, you'll want to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, The Blasphemous Herald. Each week, we share exclusive research, primary sources, and deeper analysis that goes beyond our videos. Our recent issue explores Morana's connection to other death goddesses across Indo-European cultures, with fascinating parallels you won't find elsewhere. Follow the link in the description to join our community of seekers exploring forbidden knowledge. Today, Morana survives primarily in folk traditions and neo-pagan revivals. The annual drowning of her effigy continues across Slavic countries, though few participants recognize its true religious origins. Folk songs mentioning her name are still sung during winter festivals, their lyrics altered but their essence intact. What makes Morana particularly significant for modern understanding is how her worship represents a different relationship with death than we see in contemporary society. She reminds us that death was once understood not as an enemy to be feared, but as a necessary phase in an eternal cycle. Winter's death enabling spring's rebirth. The deliberate erasure of Morana from religious history represents a pattern well seen throughout our exploration of Slavic deities. Powerful feminine forces systematically suppressed, their worship fragmented, their meanings distorted. This erasure wasn't accidental but strategic, designed to replace a worldview based on cycles and balance, with one based on linear progression and moral absolutes. Understanding Morana helps us recognize how religious narratives shape our perception of fundamental concepts, like death, transformation, and feminine power. By recovering her story, we recover not just an ancient goddess, but an alternative way of understanding our relationship with mortality itself. The archaeological record provides tantalizing glimpses of how widespread Morana's worship once was. From the Baltic to the Balkans, ritual sites dedicated to her have been discovered, often near bodies of water, or at the boundaries between settlements and wilderness, liminal spaces where the borders between life and death were thought to be thinnest. Particularly fascinating are the artifacts associated with her worship. Small clay figurines with feminine forms but skull-like faces have been found throughout Eastern Europe, dating from the 6th to 10th centuries CE. These dual-natured representations perfectly capture Morana's essence as a goddess of both death and regeneration. In some regions, particularly modern-day Poland and Czech Republic, winter solstice celebrations still contain elements that scholars recognize as remnants of Morana worship, though participants are often unaware of their origins. The burning of effigies, the carrying of death symbols out of villages, and specific songs about winter's departure all connect to ancient practices. For modern pagans and those interested in reconstructing pre-Christian Slavic religion, Morana represents a particular challenge. How does one honor a deity of death in a culture that has become deeply uncomfortable with mortality? Some contemporary practitioners have found meaning in embracing Morana's cyclical understanding of existence, acknowledging that endings are necessary for new beginnings. Tomorrow, we'll explore another deliberately obscured Slavic deity, Veles, the shape-shifting god of the underworld, whose opposition to the heavenly Perun formed the central conflict of Slavic cosmology. As god of the waters beneath the earth, cattle, wealth, and magic, Veles represented another aspect of the natural world that Christian authorities found threatening: the wild, untamed forces that existed beyond human control. Until then, remember that understanding our forgotten gods helps us navigate our spiritual present. The deities we've erased from history still shape our understanding of the world in ways we rarely recognize. By recovering their stories, we recover parts of ourselves that have been deliberately obscured. Keep blasphemous, folks.